Welcome to Aaron Mahnke's Cabinet of Curiosities, a production of iHeartRadio and Grim and Mild.
Our world is full of the unexplainable. And if history is an open book, all of these amazing tales are right there on display, just waiting for us to explore. Welcome to the Cabinet of Curiosities. The halls of American history teem with legendary folk heroes, from Johnny Appleseed to Paul Bunyan and John Henry. But for the people of the Sierra Nevada mountains, one figure stands above the rest. His name was Snowshoe Thompson, a Norwegian-American postman who delivered mail in the Sierra Nevadas during the mid-19th century. During that period of Western expansion, hundreds of thousands of Americans crossed the mountains to seek their fortunes in California. But virtually all of those pioneers only made the journey once, and many, like the infamous Donner Party, never even made it to their destination at all. Snowshoe Thompson, though, crossed the Sierras more often than anyone could count. As a mail carrier for the U.S. Post Office, he braved remote mountain passes unreachable by freight train and too dangerous for the Pony Express. He looked like a hero straight out of a Norse myth, 6 feet tall with a thick blonde beard and striking blue eyes. He could often be seen streaking through the mountains on his massive skis, weighed down by a sack of letters. His friends knew that Snowshoe's story was as American as they come. He was born in Norway in 1827 and emigrated to America with his mother when he was 10. They lived in a Norwegian immigrant settlement, first in Illinois and then in Missouri. And then in 1851, at the age of 24, he headed west to California, where he briefly tried his hand at prospecting. Gold mining, though, frustrated him, and 4 years later he was starting to despair that he would never be a success. Then one day he read a story in a Sacramento newspaper. The U.S. Post Office wanted to establish a mail delivery line through the mountains, but was struggling to find anyone brave and athletic enough to do the work involved. Thompson headed straight there and applied for the job. He made his first trek as a postman in 1856 during the dead of winter, and he never looked back. Navigating the Sierra Nevadas was difficult, but it seemed like Snowshoe had been born for it. To make travel easier, he crafted long wooden skis, similar to the kind that he would use in Norway back as a boy. Like John Henry's hammer, these skis soon gained legendary status. People said that they were 10 feet long, 6 inches wide, and weighed 25 pounds apiece. Meanwhile, stories about the mail-carrying Northman proliferated throughout the mountains. According to his most famous tale, Snowshoe once encountered a prospector trapped inside a snow-covered cabin. The man's feet were frozen solid with frostbites, leaving him in excruciating pain and unable to walk. The mail would have to wait. Snowshoe quickly gathered some firewood and built a fire in the cabin's hearth. Once the injured man was as comfortable as could be expected, he set off for Genoa, a mountain town near Lake Tahoe. Once there, he gathered a team of 6 men and raced back to the cabin. The fire had started to dwindle by then, but the prospector was still alive. Snowshoe and his companions loaded him onto a makeshift sled and hurried back to Genoa. Doctors examined the prospector's feet and concluded that there was no saving them. The frostbite was severe, and they had to be amputated before gangrene set in. There was just one problem. No doctor in the area had the chloroform they needed to perform the surgery. It was another job for Snowshoe Thompson. The mailman hopped on his skis and raced to Sacramento for the chloroform, then hurried back to Genoa in time to save the prospector's life. By the time all was said and done, he had traveled over 400 miles on skis through mountainous terrain in the dead of winter. And he wasn't done just yet. Saving the prospector had cost him a few days, which meant that Snowshoe Thompson now had a lot of lost time to make up. Before the prospector or the doctors got the chance to even thank him, he took his skis and his mailbag and headed back out into the freshly falling snow. Standing in an airfield in Guymon, Oklahoma, William McBoyle scanned the skies. It was 1926, and he was waiting anxiously for the sign that his grand scheme was going according to plan. And then suddenly he saw it, a smudge on the horizon growing closer. Just minutes later, he smiled as his pilot landed the small plane safely on the airstrip. Phase 1 of their plan had worked. Williams' pilot had taken a passenger plane from an airfield in Ottawa, Illinois, nearly 900 miles away, without getting caught. Now it was time for Phase 2. Make the swap. William went over his instructions with the pilot as the man climbed into another plane. This one was similar to the first, but much worse for wear. All the pilot had to do was fly back to Ottawa's airfield, leave this inferior plane on the airstrip, and the plane's owners would never be the wiser. Or at least by the time they discovered what had happened, both pilot and plane would be long gone. William watched as the decoy plane raced down the runway and climbed high into the sky. It was the perfect crime. At least it would have been, if William's pilot hadn't crashed. When the police showed up at his door soon after, William discovered their foolproof plot wasn't so foolproof after all. He and the pilot were under arrest. William McBoyle and his pilot were tried and convicted in federal court for violating the National Motor Vehicle Theft Act. According to the court, William had knowingly transported a stolen motor vehicle over state lines. It would have been an open and shut case, too, if not for a clever legal argument and a brand new technology. You see, William's lawyers appealed with a bold new tactic. Yes, they said, William had taken a plane that was not his. And yes, he had transported it across state lines. But none of that mattered, because legally speaking, a plane was not a motor vehicle, and there was no federal law against stealing planes. Now, you have to remember, at this point in history, 1926, airplanes were a new technology. Just 23 years earlier, Wilbur and Orville Wright had made the first successful manned flight. In the years since, people had just started to test the limits of airplanes. Until 1926, when this theft occurred, planes were small and practical. They came into play during World War I as fighters and spies. After the war, planes were mainly used in air shows, where pilots competed for speed and distance records. Most planes were not large enough to transport much heavy cargo, and the first commercial flights were still decades away. To put this incident into context, William McBoyle stole this plane exactly 1 year before Charles Lindbergh became an international celebrity for completing the first solo transatlantic flight. In light of this, McBoyle's lawyers argued that the National Motor Vehicle Theft Act was too narrowly written to include this new technology. The law described a motor vehicle as, and I quote here, automobile, motorcycle, or any other self-propelled vehicle not designed for running on rails. This argument brought the case all the way up to the Supreme Court, where, after much deliberation, the justices actually agreed with McBoyle. According to Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, an airplane did not fit the definition of a motor vehicle as stated by the National Motor Vehicle Theft Act. Similar laws and cases had been decided on the assumption that this vehicle had to be one that traveled across land. Other laws specifically excluded planes as motor vehicles. Since there was no other federal law expressly forbidding the theft of planes, McBoyle could not be convicted. Technically speaking, stealing a plane was not against federal law. Now, that's not to say that stealing in general was legal at the time. But grand larceny, which might cover stealing, say, a plane, is a state law. McBoyle was charged federally, and once he was free, neither Illinois nor Oklahoma really wanted to charge him. McBoyle gained his freedom through a fluke of federal law. The law wouldn't be amended until 1945, when the statute was changed to specifically include airplanes. This became especially important as commercial passenger flights became more common in the 1950s. But none of that mattered to McBoyle. After pulling off a high-flying heist like that, nothing could bring him down. I hope you've enjoyed today's guided tour of the Cabinet of Curiosities. Subscribe for free on Apple Podcasts or learn more about the show by visiting curiositiespodcast.com. This show was created by me, Aaron Mahnke, in partnership with How Stuff Works. I make another award-winning show called Lore, which is a podcast, book series, and television show, and you can learn all about it over at theworldoflore.com. And until next time, stay curious.